welcome to this Google Workspace admin video brought to you by Apps Events and Acer. I'm Charlie Love, and in this video I'll show you how to do a basic installation of Google Cloud Directory Sync on Windows Server with desktop experience. How I set up a basic Active Directory to sync to Google Workspace. How to set up GCDS with basic settings to sync organizational units, users and groups to Google Workspace. And how to check your sync is working as it should before you make any changes to Google Workspace. To get started, download Google Cloud Directory Sync. Just Google GCDS Google and you should find it. There are 32-bit and 64-bit versions for Windows and Linux. Most likely you'll be using Active Directory and Windows Server 2019 or 2022 in 64-bit. But whichever, download the version of GCDS that you need. This is easy to install if you are using Windows Server with a desktop experience. If you are installing it using the command line, because you have a Windows Server without desktop experience, follow the additional steps in the support pages. If you are using, you'll also find additional help in the support pages. So that's GCDS installed. Let's take a quick look at the Active Directory I've got set up. This is for a Windows domain, ChromeEnterprise.net. I've created an organizational unit called Teachers and another called Students. The users in these OUs actually match some of those I already have set up in Google Workspace, but others are new and are to be created in Google Workspace. I have a couple of groups as well. These are all teachers and all students, which you would presume contain all the members of the Teachers OU and all the members of the Students OU. I want to sync these groups as well. Now that you've seen the Active Directory setup, let's start to configure GCDS to sync with Google Workspace. Let's open it up and start. The GCDS Configuration Manager will be available in your menu. Once loaded, we can work our way through each configuration setting. To start, enter the primary domain that you use for Google Workspace. I want any existing email addresses to use this domain, so I'll tick Replace Domain Names and LDAP email addresses of users and groups with this domain. To enable GCDS to interact with the Directory API and Domain Shared Contacts API of Cloud Identity and Google Workspace, the application needs a user account that has administrative privileges. When signing up for Google Workspace, you will already have created at least one super user account. However, although you could use this user for GCDS, it's preferable to create a separate user that is exclusively used by Cloud Directory Sync. In this case, I've created an account Cloud Directory Sync at ChromeEnterprise.net. I'm not going to change any proxy settings, but I am going to add my existing super admin users to the exclusion rules so that none of them will be impacted by the sync from Active Directory. Now that I have all my exclusions in place, I can go back to the Connection Settings tab and click Authorize Now and log in using the browser. I approve the access, and this then returns an authorization token to the server. Now that GCDS has access to Google Workspace, let's set up the LDAP configuration. The server type is MS Active Directory. For this demo, I'm going to use standard LDAP for the connection, as GCDS is running locally on the same server as Active Directory. If I was running this across a number of servers, we'd use LDAP plus SSL to encrypt connections. All communication with Google Workspace is always encrypted. This is running locally, so I'll use 127.0.0.1 for the local host, and the default port is 389. If you use SSL, you need to change this to 636. If you're using a global catalog SSL port, then use 3269, which is what you would be using instead of 3268, which is what you use with a global catalog without SSL. I'm going to use simple authentication. In most cases, you would not want to use anonymous. For the authorized user, enter the domain and username of the admin user with access to Active Directory. This is your Windows admin user. Enter the password for this user. The base DN will depend on your Active Directory setup. In the case of this demo, my base DN is the root of the domain, chromeenterprise.net. My current administrative user is in this domain, so I can start up PowerShell and use get add user administrator properties proxy addresses to show data about that user, which will also give me the base DN to use. In this case, the base DN is the root of the domain, and this is dc equals chromeenterprise, dc equals net. I'll click test connection to check this works. That's working, so let's move on. Under general settings, I'll set up what I want to sync. In this case, I want to sync organizational units, user accounts, and groups from Active Directory to Google Workspace. So I tick each of these options. You'll see a range of additional options that you could use if you wish. Under org units, I'm not going to delete OUs in Google Workspace that don't exist in Active Directory. I have an OU in Google Workspace that contains all my admin users. I don't want to remove this OU, but I also don't have it replicated in Active Directory. I'm going to map the students and teachers OUs in Active Directory to the OUs I have already in Google Workspace. In my case, I use the full LDAP DN to map the OU to the OU path in Google Workspace. I need to specify a search rule to find my OUs. I'm just going to search for objects of type organizational unit. I can test the search rule to see what it looks like, and that looks fine. Finally, I have some OUs in the Active Directory that I don't want to sync. These are the base DN, net, and Chrome Enterprise, and the domain controllers OU. I'm going to exclude these. If you're making lots of changes to Google Workspace from Active Directory, you may need to change the sync threshold at the top of the page from 5% to something larger. You can test what will work later when we will simulate the sync rather than actually doing it. Now onto user accounts. The email address attribute for our Active Directory is mail, and the unique ID for each user is object GUID. And alias address attributes are in proxy addresses. If an account doesn't exist in Active Directory, but does in Google Workspace, then we're going to suspend that account rather than delete it. So I'll choose this option from the options available. I'm also not going to do anything with superadmin accounts. For the additional user attributes tab, I'll add given name and SN for the first name and last name. I'm going to ignore password sync as that isn't relevant to this implementation using Active Directory. We'll look at password sync for this in another video. I'm just using the default for the search rules, and I can test that this finds users as expected. That's working. Finally, for users, I'm going to exclude the local administrator user from the sync. Now for groups. I'm not going to delete groups which are not found in LDAP. So any group that I have already created in Google Workspace will be unaffected. Similarly, group managers won't be removed but might be changed to members or owners, depending what I've got set up. Again, I'm using the default search rules to find my groups, and I don't have any exclusions for groups. In my case, I'm not going to fill in the details to allow email notifications when the service updates, and I don't want to review logging at this stage. I'll click Sync and choose Simulate Sync. This will show me what the output from GCDS will be when it actually runs. If I was unhappy with the output and it didn't look like it would update Google Workspace as I expect, then I would go back and review my settings to correct them. In my case, I need to go back and change the thresholds for the updates for my groups. I'll allow 10 groups to be deleted, which will allow my sync to progress as expected. Now I'll try my sync again. That's now working, so I'll save the XML file. I can load this in the future and manually sync to Google Workspace using the Sync and Apply Changes button, or I can use the Task Scheduler tool to schedule a sync using the sync command line that is shown here. And that's it. A quick introduction using GCDS to sync users, groups, and OUs from Active Directory to Google Workspace. I'm Charlie Love, and this has been a Google Workspace admin tutorial brought to you by Apps Events and Acer.